Good afternoon. Welcome to the Caregiver Community Building for Caregivers of Persons with Disabilities RFP Bidders Conference through the Veteran Seniors and Human Services Levy. Today we're going to be going over the RFP itself, answering questions. This Bidders Conference will be recorded and posted on the Zoom Grants portal as well. So if folks that were not able to make it today, they will have access to these materials. So before we start any of our meetings, we want to make sure to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people and the coastal Salish people past and present, and to honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. We do think that land acknowledgement is an important piece of what we do, although it is a very small piece of what we can do to recognize the first peoples and the land that we stand on. And so if you are curious and learning more about ways you can support the Duwamish people and coastal Salish folks, you can visit duwamishtribe.org. So if folks would like to unmute themselves, we will be taking a moment for introductions. I will start. My name is Ali Jerkovich, and I am a program manager with the Veteran Seniors Human Services Levy, and I manage our body of work around persons with disabilities and those investments, this SE2A being one of them. And we'll start with introductions in the room.
Hello, Dan McDougall Tracy, Valley Cities.
Hi, my name is Tommaso Johnson. I'm also with the Vets and Human Services Levy.
Folks on the phone?
Myung Lee from Korean Women's Association.
This is Stacey Sage from Open Doors for Multicultural Families.
Bonnie Olson, Technical Assistance Provider.
Great, thank you.
Sarah Boy, Valley Cities.
Looks like we might have one or two other folks. Okay, well, welcome to everyone. If you want to go ahead again and mute your microphones for the rest of the meeting, we will be having a chance for questions at the end, so please hold them until then. So a bit about what we're going to be covering today. What is the Veteran Seniors Human Services Levy? An overview of SE2A strategy, the Caregiver Community Building Strategy, and the way that this piece of vulnerable populations funding falls under that category. An overview of the RFP itself. A brief introduction to technical assistance, including information on how to receive support in applying, and with Zoom grants, how to use the Zoom grants portal to apply. And then we will have time for questions and answers. So what is the Veteran Senior Human Services Levy? I'm just going to say VSHSL moving forward because it's a mouthful. VSHSL was passed by county voters in 2017. It is a 6-year property tax levy. It's 10 cents for $1,000 assessed value, so roughly $55 to $65 million annually. The implementation plan was passed in 2018, informed by continuous community engagement. And folks who are here today might have participated in some of that community planning work that continues throughout the course of the levy while we enter into implementation. There are 3 population groups: veterans, service members and families, seniors who are 55 and older and their caregivers, and then vulnerable populations, of which our team works on and of which persons with disabilities and their caregivers falls under. And then there are 5 result areas which mirror the code numbers. So this is social engagement, or SE. The guiding principles of the levy are connection, belonging, and this sort of core value we all hold, which is what can only the VSHSL do, which is to say that because this is new money and an opportunity to put funds into targeted communities, that we are using the levy as a chance to see ways that the government can engage with communities in ways we might not have before. And that is all in order to connect programs, connect clients, and connect providers through these different wheels, which is a combined arms, foster belonging, and community of service approach. If you're curious and want more information about the levy itself, including reading the full implementation plan, you can visit our VSHSL funding page. The overarching goal of everything that we are doing, both as a levy program as well as at DCHS and King County, is to ensure that all people, regardless of who they are and where they live, have the opportunity to thrive with full and equal access to opportunities, power, and resources. That's essentially to roll up the fact that everything we are doing is informed by an equity and social justice lens, and you will see that really clearly not only in the way that our teams communicate about the levy, but also in the way that our requests for proposals or RFPs are written during the decision-making process and every step of the way. So this strategy, SE2A, was written into the implementation plan with guidance from the community, with sort of the understanding that unpaid caregivers often provide the bulk of support for persons with disabilities, and that when we say caregivers, and we'll look at these definitions in a minute, this can be family, friends, neighbors, etc., and that caregiving can often have adverse economic, physical health, mental, and emotional effects. And so the outcome that we're looking for in what we fund during this RFP is to sustain the health and community while providing unpaid care to loved ones of caregivers themselves. So we just want to hone in on the definitions here. The VSHSL implementation plan defines caregiver as a family member or friend, and in parentheses I put or other because we know that that can be sort of a broad range of community supports, who support an older adult or a person with disability, but is not provided payment for providing those services. And so when we say unpaid, what we really mean is government benefits or financial assistance provided directly to a person for being a caregiver is not considered pay within this definition. A little bit of the background on what is written into the RFP. You can see there's a full section called background, and I wanted to touch on some of this before we move through the rest of the RFP to say that these are some of the core tenets of what helped frame the way that we are, the way that we've talked about the project within the request for proposal. So this is based off of community conversations that we've had, literature around providing caregiving supports for persons with disabilities. And a couple of the core tenets are culturally and linguistically relevant supports, transition planning, so going through large life moments with folks, making plans, particularly as adults with disabilities have caregivers who are aging and are looking at end of life planning, mental health supports for caregivers, transportation support, that we know that a huge barrier to being able to access any sort of community building opportunities is always, how do you get folks there? And what does meaningful transportation look like? Not only that is available, but is also accessible and acceptable. And so we know that that can look a number of ways, and we want providers to tell us what that means. Informal opportunities for community building was something we heard from caregivers a lot, is that yes, structured programming to learn about resources, to learn about different services that are available, to share information about navigating systems, for example, that those are all really helpful pieces, but actually sometimes folks want something that's more akin to a conversation cafe or a time to get coffee together, to go and see a movie. So to think less about this in the structure of a outcome-based programming as we might ordinarily define it, but the outcome is actually the connection and sense of belonging, and that can mean many things that don't have to have the structure of sort of what we see as generally funded programming. Inclusive community building. So we use this language essentially to say that we know that when folks with disabilities are well cared for, have opportunities for access and inclusion into the community, that is going to make the whole unit, including the caregiver, also have a better sense of belonging. And so we say, when we say inclusive community building, we mean community building for the whole family, whole community unit. So folks with disabilities having meaningful supports in addition to their caregiver, as well as other family members. So we know that, you know, siblings of adults with disabilities often take on the responsibilities of caregiving as their older adult caregivers age. And so we want to make sure that we have opportunities for everyone to be involved. We also heard really thoughtful feedback from the community about not wanting to perpetuate this idea that folks with disabilities are themselves a burden, and that in order to actually support everyone, we need to actually support everyone. And that caregivers also want community building that involves their person, that makes sure that everyone is well cared for. And then the big piece, and I bolded this on the PowerPoint if you can see it, is flexibility. This is one of our more flexible RFPs. It is written that way so that the community actually can tell us what community building looks like. I want to call this out because sometimes it can be daunting when you see an RFP that says, you tell us, that there might be something specific we're looking for, that we are hiding a ball in some way. We are really hoping the community comes to us and says, this is what that might look like for us, or we have a really innovative idea about what community building for caregivers of persons with disabilities could look like. We want to know what that is. And so the RFP is written to be incredibly flexible. That is on purpose. So a bit of an overview is the scope of work is to promote the inclusion, equitable access, advocacy, and self-determination of persons with disabilities and their caregivers, to identify what opportunities for community building are needed that encourages creative and broad solutions, and again, to promote flexibility in order to meet the self-identified needs of caregivers and persons with disabilities. And oftentimes in our RFPs, we have focused populations, and so I want to call out and make clear that all of the funding that is available for persons with disabilities and their caregivers is open to and encourages supports for persons with disabilities of all kinds. So the scope of work broken down into two very succinct parts. One is community building activities. We do give some examples in the RFP. They are not limited to those examples. The examples are to help kind of springboard some ideas of things that we heard from the community, but are by no means an exhaustive list. So things like support groups, programming for both caregivers and persons with disabilities, extracurricular outings, and again, other innovative programming. And then the second piece that needs to be addressed in the RFP and the scope of work is transportation and accessibility needs. We are actually writing into this RFP transportation supports. And so we want that to be called out in the budget and the way that your programming will operate. We want to help pay for that because we want people to actually be able to meaningfully access the supports that are available, and that is often a barrier. And if it is not transportation that is the need, whatever other accessibility needs that your program or your community sees as being pivotal to being able to meaningfully engage are other things we are interested in hearing about, because potentially it is not transportation. So again, we want it to be as flexible as possible for you to tell us. So the available funding is up to roughly $1 million, $998,300 for the program period of May 1st, 2020 until December 31st, 2023. These are tentative dates and are subject to change. Applicants may request awards up to $400,000. So we've asked folks to apply only up to a little under half of the amount for the RFP. We do reserve the right to increase or decrease that amount depending on the type of applications we get and the type of programming. But we want to make sure that we don't set folks up for asking for a full amount and then we're only able to award half, and that entirely stunts the actual success of the program that was proposed. And again, the 2021 to 23 funding is contingent on approval of the King County Council budget, and again, continued partnerships and provision of data on program performance and implementation. So eligibility for this RFP is also fairly broad. So currently serve or meaningfully engage with persons with disabilities and their caregivers in King County, or, and I want to stress this part, or have a clear plan to build capacity to provide the eligible services outlined in the scope of work. So we've seen this in some of our other investments too. We have another investment open currently for system navigation, that there are providers who are engaging with folks with disabilities who that might not be their primary function or their primary role, but they're hoping to better build up capacity to do that, and that also qualifies someone as being eligible. And so we don't want to discourage folks who are hoping to do right by the community to apply because they might not have that long-term expertise. And also currently provide or have a willingness to provide, similarly to above, the culturally specific supports or meaningfully partner with culturally specific providers or equivalent community-based entities. So essentially what we're saying is we are hoping that folks are trying to meaningfully build capacity to do this work that we're asking them to do if they don't currently do it. And we know there are also folks who have a history of doing this work for a long time, and we want to hear about that and rely on that expertise as well. So getting into kind of the nitty gritty, the contract requirements that you can expect in contracting with King County is evaluation. So you are not required in the RFP to submit a detailed, fully developed evaluation plan, but think about the way that your program model might be evaluated during our model. So we will be collecting client level data and aggregate and narrative reports. And so we will be thinking about the ways that we can define success, and our performance measurement evaluation team does that in partnership with any awarded entities. And so just something to be thinking about. There is a question in the RFP around data collection, and so while you don't have to have a fully developed plan, we want you to be thoughtful about how might you evaluate a program of this kind, because that will be a piece of contracting with the government. So the timeline, it was released on January 29th. The bidders conference today, February 12th. The last day for small agencies to initiate requests for technical assistance is on February 24th, and we will be talking about what that means. And the final days to submit questions is March 2nd. So I want to talk really briefly about the submitting questions. Any questions you have that were not asked at today's bidders conference, and in addition to the ones asked at today's bidders conference, if they're directed to me, you will get a generic email back that says, due to procurement policies, I am unable to answer questions directly to a person, but that your question, in addition to these, will be added to a FAQ that will be posted on the Zoom Grants portal. The reason we do that is not to diminish the fact that you are reaching out for supports, but to make sure that everyone has equitable access to the information that we are providing, so that one party does not have information another eligible applicant might be needing. So we encourage folks to look back regularly to see when those are posted, and that is under the library tab. So the responses are due on March 9th, 2020 by midnight, ideally not directly before midnight. Zoom Grants is an online platform. It is fairly user-friendly, but we want to make sure folks account for any technical glitches that might come up. The responses will tentatively be reviewed and rated in March. We will host interviews with applicants if necessary, also in March. The intent is to notify folks of award decisions in April, and the anticipated contract start date will be May. How to apply? Again, submit proposals by 11:59 on Monday, March 9th. They will include the response to the summary questions, response to the narrative questions, which will also include an organizational equity chart, which there is more information about on the Zoom Grants portal, and then a budget. I've gotten questions in the past about what the budget needs to look like. The budget is a template that can be modified to suit the needs of the program or the applicant. There are things that we are wanting to see that you can also provide additional context for, like staffing and any things we might not have accounted for, or things that you want to clarify. There is a section for narrative responses within the budget as well. And we know that May is not January 1st, and so it is accounting for a full calendar year that might not be starting a full calendar year. We are hoping that folks can do the best estimate of what one calendar year might look like, knowing that we will be starting mid-fiscal year. The rating criteria: organizational background and experience is 20 points, the program model 40 points, equity and social justice 20 points, budget and fiscal 15, data collection and evaluation is 5 points, and then interviews, if necessary, would be 10 points. And all of this information can be found in the RFP itself. In addition to, you will note these on the questions that are asked in Zoom Grants. So, technical assistance. There is free application support available for small organizations, and we identify a small organization as having fewer than 20 full-time employees, not people, but as a combined number of hours. So say you have 2 half-time folks, that counts as one of the 20 FTEs, and less than $4 million operating budget in the prior fiscal year. If you qualify under those 2 things, you can have access to free application support. And so what that means is that you can go in and look at the technical assistance form that is attached to the request for proposal documents in Zoom Grants. And there you will have a list of some of the TA providers. We do have one on the phone who might be able to answer questions if those are asked at the end. And I'm noting here on the PowerPoint that the date is wrong. So qualifying organizations should contact the technical assistance consultants directly. Again, their contact information is on that sheet. No later than February 24th. Apologies, it says January 20th. So attachment D lists all of those consultants. And they can help with things like helping formulate a budget, helping you think about how to talk about your program, because applying for a government grant, even if we're trying to make it as accessible as possible, it can be hard to fully communicate the way that your program might fit under this, and they are skilled at helping flesh that out and helping support folks to navigate this system, including Zoom Grants. So Zoom Grants is the online platform that we use for all of the levy-funded investments that are procured through an RFP. So all RFP materials are posted on Zoom Grants under the library tab. Check regularly again for updates. We do regularly post answers to questions we receive. All applications must be filled out and submitted via Zoom Grants. And again, questions today and those submitted will be posted to Zoom Grants. Now we have time for questions. If you have questions that you don't ask today or any follow-up needs, you can both use the Zoom Grants portal to send me a message or email me directly at ajurkovich@kingcounty.gov. So if folks on the phone have questions or folks in the room, now would be the time to ask.
Question.
Yep.
Okay. When I look at the budget part, are
Yeah.
you expecting us to do the budget yearly or the 2.5 years?
Yes, so are you asking about, so the budget is intended to be a best estimate of one fiscal year of your proposed program model. We know it's a little funky because the contract start date would be mid-fiscal year, and so we're asking for your best estimate of the budget that you might need for 1 year to run this program.
Okay.
That the full budgeting conversation can be adjusted and will be during the awarding and contracting process. And so this again is an estimate, so we can get an idea of what this might cost and how you're intending to allocate funds.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Great.
And then when I look at the personnel detail budget, and there's only salary, correct? And then, but when we go back to the program budget, we need to include it with the benefit. Is it correct? Or we need to put the second tier personnel detail budget in the salary and then benefit together?
So you can use the budget, I think, how it makes most sense to you. It's intended to be pretty broad so that folks can use it in a way that you are currently operating your own budget. But there is a section for salary, so we can see the goal behind having personnel details is to see what the wage would be of the person operating the program. And then the full budget is sort of a summary of all that information. And again, there's a box in the budget template where you can better flesh out and describe exactly what that might look like. So we've seen folks in the personnel details, then in the description or the narrative response, write out what the benefits might include, what the hours might be of that person's job, etc.
Okay, thank you. So the total amount, 900 something, is the 2.5 years fund, not the yearly.
Yes, that is total until 2023. That is the amount allocated for this specific strategy within the life of the levy.
So 2.5 years budget,
Yes.
correct? For grant.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we have a question typed in regarding the demographic information for the organization. What if an organization is so small that asking employees to identify their sexual orientation, etc., might be intrusive, and how should we handle that? We in no way want to compromise folks' sense of self-agency or privacy, and so answer as best as you can. If there is an unknown category, please include that. And we are asking for this information so we can see, for example, if an organization is intending to provide services for a specific community but does not have representation from that community, that's something we want to see when we look at the way that we weigh our equity and social justice values. But again, by no means, thank you for that question. Do we want you to intrude upon your employees or staff's personal agency or sense of privacy?
I have a question. This is Bonnie Olson. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. In the definition of on page 4, where you talk about caregivers that's not considered provided payment, but
Yes.
then you have the clause that government benefits provided to them for being a caregiver are not considered pay. So does that basically mean, for example, someone who is, say they're a caregiver providing home-based chore services for someone who's low income, then that would not be considered pay?
So essentially what we're trying to get at is these are not professional services. So there are caregivers who are professional services that are not someone who might be receiving benefits as a result of being an in-home caregiver, that is someone related to or providing care for a loved one. And so that's what we're trying to get at when we talk about government benefits. We know that folks do receive some support. Some folks receive some support from the government. We realize that it's by no means enough to sustain someone's sense of stability or well-being. Okay. And so that's what we're trying to get at when we say unpaid, so that there's not confusion about getting government benefits as a form of payment. We're talking about folks who are doing this as a professional service.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, seeing no more questions, we are going to go ahead and end today. Again, if you do have questions that come up after today's meeting, please contact me. My email address is on the RFP. It is ajerkovich@kingcounty.gov. There is also an option in the Zoom Grants portal to send me a message. Anything that is said today, including the recording of this bidders conference, answers to all of the questions, any future questions, will all be uploaded onto the Zoom Grants library tab. Thank you all so much for your time and interest, and we look forward to receiving your applications.